Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live event today and how Agentic AI is transforming government service. I'm Joe Murray, Global Head of Customer Experience and Product Innovation at ThoughtWorks, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. We're going to explore the theme that is becoming increasingly vital around how greater efficiency, better outcomes, and indeed a new standard for public service is now within reach. Our distinguished panel today will share how AI is fundamentally revolutionizing both the constituent and the employee experience for government agencies. In particular, recent developments in agentic architectures offer more unique opportunities to solve challenges and facing governments that have really been daunting until now. I'm honored to introduce our incredible guests, Richie Etwaru, CEO of Mobius, and Dion James, the head of Gen AI Cohort Partner Engineering at Google. Welcome, Richie and Dion. And as a matter of housekeeping, we've reserved time at the end of our panel for discussion and Q&A, and we look forward to your great questions and reflections. So moving right into the content, we're going to talk about first of all, I'd like to discuss the nature of the problem to be solved. So let's kick things off by discussing the landscape. Government agencies are constantly striving to deliver a better, more seamless experience. From your perspectives, what are the fundamental problems that need to be solved as agencies seek to achieve this? And maybe Richie, you can kick us off.
Well, thanks for that, and thank you for having us. I think if we just dive right into the content, we can solution the problem a lot. Just taking a step back out and looking at why the problem might be worth or more important to solve right now. So like when the internet was here, yes, government needed to adopt the internet. And of course, that adoption was there. Here with artificial intelligence, there's a couple of things that are moving. One is consumer sentiment has been really restructured around what they expect from technology. COVID took about half of the world who were like, technology is kind of okay and I don't mind it, to no, I see how technology matters now. So broader across the entire consumer landscape, there's an expectation for technology, not just from institutions, but from governments as well. And governments did a lot of that where, you could get a vaccine website, right? And suddenly you're like, wait a second, I could get that stuff from government, right? So I think that's one, there's a draw. The second is that, across the world, whether we believe it's a good thing or not, history will tell, governments are starting to look at themselves more as an economic balance sheet. And if taxes are your revenue and citizens are your customers, you're going to start thinking about customer experience a little bit more. And last but not least, we are at the cusp of an industrial revolution. Dion's in the middle of it. He's going to talk a little bit about that. Governments are usually the biggest buyers of industrial revolutions, right? No question that governments bought electricity more than everybody else, iron more than everybody else, the internet more than everybody else, more than likely going to consume AI more than everybody else. If you take those three things and you put it into a Venn diagram, DMV is about to get super exciting.
Thank you, Richie. That's really interesting. Dion, can you add some color to that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure thing. So from the perspective that I have, as well as representing Google, with AI technologies, especially in the government space, one of the biggest hurdles we see to get started is really to address two major issues. Where to begin, right? That's a paralysis or a sticking point. And then also addressing the data silo challenge, right? With AI solutions, we need to have a clear vision and strategy with AI solutions. And then also within government, a lot of times there's a technical skills gap. So understanding that with these solutions, as exciting as it is, we need to have the ability of people that understand how these solutions work to effectively manage them and oversee them.
We definitely see there's this unprecedented problem of, governments have traditionally struggled with the fact that agencies have not been built around the human agenda that people are trying to solve, whether it be getting mental health support for my kid or applying for unemployment or starting a business. We find that for any of those endeavors, people have to navigate anywhere from 8 to 12 different agencies to accomplish those agendas. And when we try to integrate across those agencies, many of these agencies don't have very mature APIs, if any APIs at all. So getting and even accomplishing something simple as a uniform consent form that is used across the 6 agencies that provide mental health services can be a huge lift at sometimes for some agencies. So the interesting thing that I think agentic architectures offer that you are both alluding to is this whole idea of observability, governance, as well as new methods for creating this integrated experience that don't require a heavy back-end lift of changing the legacy systems that exist today.
And there's a really important distinction in what it means to have your data ready for a deterministic world, which is the world that we lived in for the longest while. And so, like Dion was saying about data, there's a difference between data being ready for a deterministic world versus data being ready for a probabilistic world. And so we've heard, there's three guarantees, right? There's death, taxes, and data not being ready, right? Those are the 3 things you can kind of rely on. Data not being in a deterministic world, it had a very like a strict structure tied to it, right? Like thy data should be this and it should work this way. In a probabilistic world, data that is unstructured, which we always had vector databases for, but now could be used to generate more utility faster. So from a sequencing perspective, and I think Dion mentioned this already, like where do you start, right? I think that was, Dion, before you got cut off the first time, you're having, your browser is not being your friend right now, but you were talking about sequencing, right? But sequencing is super important. And while you're here, just pick this up. Like you gotta pick use cases that are perfect for probabilism. Because if you pick a use case that has some deterministic thing to it, you're going to be in trouble, right? Yep. For example, providing answers about things that are not extremely precise and critical are a very easy government use case. And you want to be able to think about, well, where are the third rails that I don't want to touch? Where is there something that it has to be this answer and it has to be this answer every single time, no matter what, or we break a law? Sequencing wise, that's not where you want to go to probabilism right away. So the data is ready for certain use cases, but not for others.
Thanks, Richie. And I think that's a great segue into our next topic is I think we've kind of laid the landscape of what are the problems we're solving. So maybe we can move into what are some of the unique opportunities that our new world of generative AI and agentic architectures offer us in terms of solving these problems. And I know you at Mobius have really tapped into some key themes around labor arbitrage and maybe you can expand on how the agentic UX layer is contributing to those solutions.
Let's pick up Dion into the conversation. So Dion, we talked a little bit about data and segmentation of use cases and readiness. We're sort of going into this world of labor arbitrage, on the perspective that labor is probably one of the things that's going to change in a final outcome, so to speak, in the long range here. How are you seeing labor show up in the conversation in the context of the broader news cycles, et cetera, with Gen AI as it relates to government?
What we're seeing is really a development of what the labor and workforce look like. And what is that connection that governments can help us make from a unified person standpoint in terms of understanding skill sets and how can we adapt and make AI solutions adaptable to each persona, right? So understanding that there's overarching AI solutions or approaches that we can take where it's a one shoe fits all approach, if you will, for an analogy standpoint. But then from a standpoint of working with the different labor divisions, as well as understanding how regulation can come into play with what we can also position into the world, there's a few corresponding components that all have to come together in order to bring this to reality, right? So from a policy standpoint, from a regulation standpoint, as well as an education standpoint, all of those combined with the ability to address a unified governance and strategy really is how the labor force, I think, can address these changes that are approaching us.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe, I just want to pick up on that for a second. So, when in time of change, partnerships is what drive economies, right? When there's so much change going on, there's almost musical chairs in the global technology service provider marketplace. And so partnerships are super, super, super important. When we face off with government agencies, the topic of labor is broken into three categories. First topic is, hey, how do we upskill the human labor we have today using AI? Partners like Google offer massive learning platform of AI, not just a capability platform of AI. So yes, here are our models, but here is AI teaching you how to use our models. And I think that's category one, right? And the data producers in the market are producing that education. So OpenAI has its training, Microsoft has its training, Apple has its training, Google has its training. Second is the economics, the arbitrage, right? Where is it that AI can augment a human that I have right now? And we're just starting to step into the labor arbitrage aspect of it, right? And I think that's a little bit more of a productivity boost than an arbitrage boost. Because if you can have AI increase the individual GDP, if I may, of every employee, then you have a productivity boost. And then that third category is kind of where we hang out sometimes as Mobius. We've partnered with ThoughtWorks on this a little bit, which is, hey, I just don't have enough human labor to do this one thing, right? Like even if we could fund this, we probably couldn't even find everybody with the skill. We couldn't find everybody with the language. We couldn't staff this 24/7, 365. And so that's where AI is starting to show up as labor now, not as an arbitrage for replacement, but for an arbitrage for filling experience gaps. But that is just not a good idea to fill with humans. But that's how the whole labor thing, to me, is kind of shaping up as we engage with government agencies.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think the interesting dynamic, what people ask me a lot is, oh, are we, eliminating jobs or are we replacing people? And the irony of the state of a lot of government agencies is they haven't had enough people to support the workload they have for a number of years now. So it's not about replacing people. It's about giving people relief who are extremely overburdened and can't provide the level of service that they would like to and need to in order for citizens to engage with the services that they want and need. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic. And the second piece, when we talk about the agentic UX layer, another thing I'd love for you guys to comment on is the trend line that most UX up until today has been what I would characterize as transactional in nature. So if you want to open a new business, you go online on the web and you get this nice web form that's 3 web pages long that you have to enter a bunch of information in. And it's very, very transactional. Click buttons, select drop downs, fill in fields that you've already filled in on 5 other forms in different places. And that's a transactional interface. Where I think the future of AI UX is going is a conversational interface. So it's more about asking questions and solving problems. I mean, we even see it most simply in how Google search is evolving in from providing search results to providing answers. Now in the newest version of Google search, you get an answer to your question summarized by Google AI before you see your list of links that address your search. So I'd love you guys to comment on that shift from transactional UX to more conversational, how critical that is, and how this combination of agentic frameworks and new technologies like agentic UX that you offer, Richie, are contributing to that more conversational interface.
Yeah, sure thing. So I could take my first stab at that. I would say with this shift in approach to agentic AI, it's introducing that new level of intelligence and autonomy. So if you think of an AI agent outside of a chatbot, right? That chatbot was, let's say, maybe 2 years ago hype cycle. Chat in the interface of the modalities of how we interact. So video, voice, audio, most people can talk faster than they can type. So from that perspective, think about these AI systems as a goal-oriented program that can perceive its environment. It can understand what's around. It can see what I'm seeing. I can show it things, and it can understand from the standpoint of the reasoning components, which is where the LLMs come into play. And then being able to take that information and querying to plan and use various tooling to act independently and semi-autonomously to achieve these objectives. So that goal-oriented programming really addresses the workflow of what you're trying to do. And an example of that could be something like benefits eligibility determination, right? Something that could ingest data, whether that's forms, where they need to understand something like income, family household size, residency, where they live, all the things that come into play from various government databases, and cross-reference that with eligibility criteria. Being able to do that on the background where it's not a manual, okay, I have to call you and check. Or if we do want to shift it to the customer perspective for the constituent side of the house within governments, if I do need a system where, hey, I have my form, I'm stuck on this question, and I can upload something, and I can then have a Q&A on that from whether that's like a permitting or licensing question. Automation of that end-to-end process, and then changing how we are using these ways of communication, but it's really the perception of being able to have the thought processes, the understanding capabilities, as well as the ability to take action. So I do believe that that's going to be the huge shift that we see.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dion.
I think that we're seeing the same shift. We're at Mobius, we are picking up the AI train where the agentic architectures are and trying to bridge that gap between what consumers want. So right now, most of the agentic AI interfaces are, to Dion's point, right past typing right into audio. Like audio is just about to become the thing. And we pick it up at audio and take it out to what we call a tele. I'll share a little bit of this here for a second, but the relationship change is being seen to me from three perspectives. One is it's guided versus self-directed. So user interfaces today are pretty self-directed. The forums that we all just discussed, the websites that we just discussed, you're left to bump into the button, so to speak, for lack of better words, right? You're left going, really, that's where you would put the scroll bar, right? And it's not because we don't have great UX designers in the world and great UI designers in the world. It's the fact that experience is hyper personalized. Experience is one of those things that is incredibly personal. Right? You can't find the perfect placement for a button for all mankind. You just can't. Somebody's not going to like it, right? And so this self-directed experience is moving to a guided experience. And I use the word guided to be separate from personalization because we were able to do personalization with deterministic logic, which is, hey, if you're from Seattle, we should probably offer you something here. That's still very deterministic. It's personalization, but the perception of intelligence is not there, right? What leads to this guiding is when you add probabilism to it, which is, hey, I know Dion likes this thing. I should probably show that. And the trade-off that we're making and governments have to make between citizens and governments and organizations is that, are you willing to trade off this experience that is amazing at 100x more things? Okay, it's just incredibly personalized, but it's going to get a couple of things wrong sometimes in exchange for an experience that is extremely restricting and painful, but it'll do the same thing every time you ask it. And that's where the experience is shifting from deterministic to guided. And I think that's the foundational thing. And that trade-off is at the crux of what we have to ask as we think about readiness and use cases. I'll talk about how we go beyond multimodality in a second, but that's kind of where I see, to me, that's if the government agencies and the decision makers get over that thought hill, right? Like once you get over the fact that determinism has reached its limits as it relates to experience delivery, very quickly you start to get the rest of it, which is, now I understand what's going on, but I got to think about it completely different.
Yeah, and I think the interesting themes that bubble up for me in that context, Richie, and maybe you can talk about the specifics of the interface you were alluding to in this light. But to me, the journey of the constituent is one of first discovery. So we've seen at the VA, for instance, there's 128 different potential services a veteran can engage with. And it's daunting for them to figure out which of those things are relevant to me, which ones am I even entitled to, and which ones are most relevant to my current situation. That whole guided discovery aspect of who are you and what are you entitled to, so that we're helping you discover all of those services that you're actually entitled to, and we're stack ranking those in some kind of, it's kind of akin to the commercial of next best offer in the commercial sector of what is that service that's probably most relevant to your situation right now based on the context of your current web session and what we know about you from an attribution perspective. And then once you move from that discovery and entitlement exercise, it's all about activation. So another thing, and we'll talk about outcomes in a second, but in order for government agencies to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for, those it's all about activation now. And so we've seen a lot with the agencies that we've worked with. There's a lot of bailing out that happens where the application process is just too complicated, and so I give up. And so that whole process of, okay, now I've discovered what I'm entitled to. I'm trying to engage with and activate that service for myself, and it's too hard or too complicated. And so how do I simplify that? So what are your thoughts around that whole journey of discovery, entitlement, and activation, and how guided experiences can help with that?
So I think from everything you just said, Joe, right, there's a few ways from all the transitions that we're making around this technology now where we can anticipate needs, and we can also have, Richie used the word guided, I like the word tailored interactions, right? And that is powered from all of the information that are built off of past interactions, right? So as these systems evolve, the memory and the capabilities of how far it can understand context relevant to the personal user or the personal accounts that these systems are interacting with will improve that data accuracy, right? So from the standpoint of the enhanced decision making and validation efforts, right? We are trying to work as closely with all of the decision makers, that people that understand the data today, to understand what is this intelligent data integration strategy, and what does that discovery look like as well, so that way, as we design systems that are supposed to take actionable insights, anticipate your needs to be able to, let's say, for example, make recommendations around different programs of interest that are relevant to who you are once you log in with your own credentials, for example, to, let's say, a web application for you use the VA with all their services, right? A web portal, for example, could be something that could really address all these things. And then having data curated based off of certain maybe keywords. So taking traditional search mechanisms and technologies and also applying them to the way that this new era of computing allows us to also go about mirroring up the data insights to the intelligent reasonings now that AI and large language models offer us.
Yeah. I think that the data keeps coming back, and it goes back again to that readiness and the use case mapping. Joe, the collaboration that we worked on a government project, something that stands out to me was we and Dion, you haven't seen what we do. We could pick up afterwards. We mix audio, video, text, buttons, UI, animations in a single experience on the web. And so when someone visits a website now, it has the perception of personhood, it has the competency, it has the conversational nature to it. So imagine you're going to go buy a phone from a phone company. You go to the website and you say, hey, what do you all have on sale today? Just like if you were to walk into a store, right? Because that's what you would say. What do you have on sale today, right? And the entire experience changes to say, hey, Richie, what do we have on sale today? Is this? And the phone shows up in front of you, and there's two things that you could click left and right to get to the next phone. And that's what I mean by we're picking it up at conversational and taking away all the way there. The reason why that matters and why we've been able to see governments get excited about this, which is a little bit surprising to me, is that when we went from brick and mortar to the website, we traded up for convenience, right? I can get to that website. But we traded away the conversational nature of it. I can't ask questions. It's a huge deal, right? We traded away the competency that is there. It's not personable, all right? And so now with artificial intelligence, you're able to go to a website and get the best of all worlds. You can go there anytime you want. It's convenient, okay? Foundational models have helped language translation a lot. So it's any language you want. So anytime, any language. By the way, you could speak naturally using a conversational model, and then you're aesthetically supported with an avatar, with buttons, with text, with media, all at the same time. In some ways, the reason why I think governments are excited about this, and we're seeing this in enterprise as well, is because finally you don't have to make that trade-off. There is a hybrid medium now, which is data and intelligence and media smashed together that could be delivered over the internet that brings those two worlds in a 1+1=3 experience. So that's kind of where we hang out on the what we call the agentic UI on top of the agentic frameworks.
Yeah, and maybe Dion, could you riff a bit on that next layer down? Because we kind of glossed over how agentic frameworks like Google's agentic framework can actually offer new and accelerated options to drive the level of integration on the back end that we need, where historically, legacy systems and lack of developed APIs have prevented a more integrated experience. So let's talk a little bit about below the waterline, if you will. We used to talk about microservices and composable architectures, but in an agentic framework, there's a new story being told. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So with the agentic frameworks, the new story that we're telling is essentially looking at an orchestration of steps as opposed to one-off results based off of your technology workflow. So with the agentic processes, think of it as a way for us to build out multiple subtasks and have a orchestration of systems that essentially can take in these responses or queries to execute on what it is they're doing. So say, for example, you have a query where you're looking to get a permit application for a new business, but you need to verify documents from multiple systems. You could have one that can send out notifications. You could have an agent or agentic workflow that can send out a notification to the permitting office of a request. You can then send the queries off to, let's say, a division of labor or to see what your records are, your work history is, right?
Or so zoning of your location, all that stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the way these systems are being designed now is being able to really have a breakdown of the decomposition so that you can understand what your orchestration process really does look like. So also being able to adapt that to government workflows, right? Really understanding that we could do this with real-time data, even depending on how it's designed. So if let's say that same person that's applying for those permit applications, if they're missing a document, we could proactively reach out so that there isn't that haul point. Or if we need to change the workflow and adapt it accordingly, where let's say there's new regulations that have passed where let's say 2 particular requirements no longer needed, we can adapt that so that prompt or that workflow is no longer executed, so we can keep things updated as well. So the approach that we're taking, whether that's from like a enterprise standpoint, with like internal data, even for like our government knowledge workers, we're taking a centralized approach where we're trying to collapse all this into the same user interface, right? So the benefits behind that is working with the APIs, working with the different third-party data sources, being able to have ways for us to communicate with those data sources. So if we cannot reach those services with our querying, right? And then also understanding we want to have flexibility in that approach as well. we can also do this in a way where we don't necessarily need to ingest all of that data to make an understanding of it as well. So taking a federated approach, using all of your existing identity providers in order to get access and have that personal understanding of who I am based off of some of your existing systems, is what we're doing within our Google agent space, which is our centralized UI for all things agentic. All right, we're collapsing all of the workflows, all of our data sources into that. And that ties into, all of the various components under the hood, like the agent-to-agent protocol or the multiple context protocol from MCP, right? Understanding how do we make these data systems talk in a way that they can understand what is needed from the data system, and making sure that we're doing it in a secure fashion also, because as one of the biggest hurdles with this new architecture is that the data needs to be shared, and sharing data brings in all these other concerns as well around regulation and privacy. So can we redact data? Can we make sure that there aren't any things being, injected into the data for corruption? All those things are being taken into account with this new architecture approach from the agentic workflows versus traditional systems.
Point in our chat, we should shift to our third and final topic around deploying for outcomes, and what are the outcomes that are meaningful. I mean, when we talk about the transformative potentials we've discussed, it's like, what's the pragmatic advice for how government leaders should approach these solutions in a manner that helps them get to the outcomes that matter, and avoid getting stuck in quote unquote yet another POC that never sees the light of day. And it's really interesting as we engage on these, the types of outcomes that the government sector looks for have a strong analogs in the private sector. So we look at top line benefits and bottom line benefits. So top line benefits in the commercial sector are things like increased revenue, market share, and profits. But top line benefits for the government sector are things like economic impact for the city that I'm providing a new business portal for, or even more importantly, human outcome impact. Human outcomes, like we've reduced the level of teenage suicides in our state because of our mental health programs for youth. So those are like really powerful top line results. But the bottom line results are similar to private in the sense that, and similar to private in the sense that their government's still looking for efficiency and cost reduction, because now more than ever with our current administration, we see more and more pressure on government agencies to do more with less. And so how do they squeeze the most value out of the smaller budgets they have and the smaller workforces they have? So maybe Richie, you could kick us off with, based on how we've articulated the problem and what some of the solutions are, what's your advice for the leaders out there listening about how they move into action so that they get results?
Yeah. First, Joe, I've seen your avatar and it doesn't stutter and its voice doesn't break up. just AI 1, Joe 0, right? Yeah. So when I was in financial services, I was running an innovation portfolio. I walked into a stat in an innovation program where 75% of all pilots failed. We were going through social, and so I diagnosed this portfolio of projects that have been approved for an innovation budget. Why is this? This is a high failure rate. This is not startup. You're not betting venture capital. Everybody knows what they're doing. I walked away with something that informed the rest of my career, which was that when a new technology comes in and everybody realizes that there's going to be funding, right? Like, wow, there's going to be funding. We're going to go do new things. Majority of us dust off the old projects and proposals that we had that were never going to be funded. Now into this new world, like, hey, this new thing's here. Remember that thing that you didn't want to fund? We're going to go solve it with this thing. Okay. And that's a really bad idea. I just did some work with the board where we saw the same type of dynamic, because what happened was all the cloud and transformation stuff that was never getting funded is now suddenly like, look, AI, we can solve this. Let's go put AI on it. And you find three outcomes in the end. One is the problem was never worth solving in the first place. That's why it never got funded. It wasn't a technological limitation. Okay. So now you got an AI project that's failing, giving AI a bad name because it was a project that shouldn't have worked in the first. Second is the consumers never wanted it. And third is it's a horrible use case for AI. Right. So I think where I'm trying to guide clients and to advise folks is like, if you're going to go look for outcomes in AI, start by saying, what are new problems that I couldn't fix in the past that I could probably go fit right now, where it fits like a glove, right? This nature of probabilism in that problem fits like a glove, and you're going to see better outcomes. Outcome specific stuff, Joe, and you kind of teed this up really around outcomes. You got to start with the outcomes that can come out. That's the bottom line. There are things about new technologies that are going to happen and it's going to work. And that might not be in your agenda. That might not be in the priority that you had coming in. So if you keep carrying your priorities that were informed in an information world with deterministic systems out into this probabilistic world with intelligence, you're not doing yourself a lot of favors. You got to do a lot of rethinking here. I'll give you a really simple rethinking and I'll pass it off to Dion here. So Dion talked a little bit about the dynamicism of APIs being strung together. Dion, I'm simplifying your words a little bit here, right? But that kind of pick where you want to go, right? Now, many organizations, both government and private, already has pretty good workflow, like API orchestration workflow. Not all, there's still a lot to go, but there are a significant amount of companies that have really good workflows. Those workflows are quite rigid, right? If thou wants this, thou must do that. If thou wants this, thou must do that, right? Quite rigid. When you come to probabilism and you do something like conversational, let's say I'm buying, I don't know, a coffee maker, okay? And I'm in a conversation with a conversational agent. And I'm right at the point where I'm ready to go buy it. I got a red one that we've been talking about, okay? And I wanted to pick it up, right? And like the agent's ready to go purchase, right? And I say, you know what? I changed my mind. Just ship me the blue one. Okay. In a deterministic world, I would have to change my method by clicking a box that says I'm going to shipping instead. I'd have to go a drop down, change from red to blue or blue to red, and then the API workflows go out and do what they want to do. Here, the language model and the conversational model, what did he really mean? And what he meant now goes, you know what? I don't need to call that shipping agent anymore or that store fulfillment agent. So that ability to kind of think about where does AI really help is when things are not clear, when things are going to change a lot, when things are going to be very fluent. I think that's where you start to see the outcomes. If you put it in something that has to be deterministic, it's almost like in order for us to have intelligence, to leverage probabilism, you have to take determinism out of it. Because the minute you put in 1% of deterministic rules in a probabilistic system, you lose 90% of the intelligence from probabilism. That's kind of how you got to think about where are you going to get these outcomes from. And you need technical minds that understand this. You need strategy minds. You need all sorts of partnerships to bring it together.
Thank you, Dion. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts definitely align with Richie from the standpoint of the shift in mindset. I think where we truly see the stall point to your original questions on how do we get from proof of concept to a production state, right? It's, again, those meaningful outcomes for the constituents, right? Understanding everything may not be a revenue or cost driven thing, but in terms of satisfaction for citizens, enhanced public safety, for, let's say crime and public agencies, we have the ability to really align with, I'd say, mission driven AI, right? Most of the successful deployments that we see outside of the proof of concepts all have that clear problem that Richie is saying, right? That use case. What are we addressing? If there wasn't a good use case for it in a traditional sense, maybe it might not be the most AI centric, but what is that visibility into the problem set? And then from there, does the interest that the government has outweigh all of the other things that would potentially in the past maybe prevented that justification for the investment. So once we have that to be able to build that proposition with clear value, I think is how we get past the stall points within our proof of concepts. You need the mission driven approach. You need that buy-in from the decision makers and that clear ROI and value proposition.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's so true. I mean, and we've seen evidence of it, right? I mean, the very public case study that we've worked on together is the whole Beacon program for the state of Illinois. I mean, that had one of the things that made that successful was not only a really talented director that was driving it, but it also had sponsorship and mission importance all the way up to the governor's office. And so what we're finding is that mission and that executive sponsorship is just as important as how you deliver the enabling technologies, right? Because you're not going to get 6 different agencies to agree to use the same consent form without, a very senior person overlooking those agencies expecting collaboration because they're not used to collaborating that way. So there's a very non-technical, just program governance and executive sponsorship that's true here no matter what. But I also think the other thing we've seen, and this is another good example for Beacon and also the reality of government budgets is having a North Star, but then taking a thin slice approach, right? So being able to say, okay, what's the first MVP that's most important that we're going to roll out rather than boil the ocean and try to solve the whole problem? What's the most important first step for Beacon? It was, how do we provide better access to state mental health services for youth? It's like, well, let's focus on those capabilities and those experiences that most directly impact that agenda, that mission, right? So I think having the mission, having the sponsorship, and then aligning the technology very demonstrably with how it contributes to that mission all helps us converge on these outcomes, right?
Yeah. Joe and Dion, I found 2 things that I'm tracking as a trend. One is that one, collaboration and speed itself is almost flipping itself now. So in the past, humans would collaborate more than systems, right? Like, I grew up in the banking industry. I'd talk to more people that own more systems than the systems would talk to each other, right? So humans collaborated more than systems. Now, as we start to emerge in this agentic world where systems have autonomy, albeit a little bit of a Wild West, needs to be controlled by service providers like us, autonomy to collaborate. Systems are capable of collaborating way more than humans. And so it's almost like there's this like, wait, can it do that? Yes, it can do that. It can collaborate. So I think that's one part of it. But the other part, so that will give executives some confidence to go, yeah, you know what, I that could happen now, right? The other part is there's a little bit of trauma there. Every time an executive had to make a decision about integrating data or integrating systems, it comes with some trauma. And that was last generation's reality. Integration is easier now. Communicating between systems is easier now. So I think in education, for executives to understand, how does a project feel different from 2020 to 2025, right? What is the capability underneath? How can we deliver faster? Why is integration less hard at this point? Those things have to be unhinged across the board because there's a lot of trauma from 10, 15 years of digital transformation.
Excellent. I think this has been really good. Thank you both for your contributions. I think it's time now for us to switch to our Q&A section. Let me see what we have for questions coming through. So for those of you who want to ask questions, please use the chat, and our moderators in the back end will feed those to me for us to queue up. I think the first one we have is, given the significant investment often required for new technologies, what are some key metrics or indicators that government and agencies should track to demonstrate the tangible ROI of adopting agentic frameworks beyond just efficiency gains? Who wants to take that one?
Look, I think first of all, in this entire thing, you got to start with a human centric approach. In that, we now know that if we don't think about the unintended consequences of broad reaching technology, we don't want to be there again. We don't want to be. I don't want to be 20 years after my first post on a Facebook wall to be figuring out what I should have been thinking 20 years ago, right? And I'm very excited to see the amount of conversations that are happening about ethical AI, about responsible AI, about trusted AI, way ahead of the phenomena, really starting to step up and scale. So I think that we're having those conversations about unintended consequences way earlier than we did in the internet, which I think is super exciting. That's a good thing. The second thing is, I think the word is just washing. Like, there is cloud washing, there was blockchain washing, there was metaverse washing, there was electricity washing, right? There was plastic washing. Like, when something comes out, let's put that on there. You need a little bit of sobriety and grown-upness in the room to start to value the actual business over the technology. The challenge is that when you do technology-driven transformations, the population of people that work on that project is highly skewed to technical folks. And technical folks are highly, like myself, are highly eager and excited about the technology, and we lose track of the fact that there's a business component there. So the composition of the team structure and the governance structure, right, and the steering committees really have to be balanced a little. I've been in many large programs that failed, and I could tell you 2 or 3 times I walked into them and I just looked at the committee and there was one non-technical person in the room. I'm like, this is going to be 99% innovation, 0% adoption. So think about the composition of innovation and adoption as you think through this stuff.
Dion, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say also from a budgeting approach, or trying to understand how to justify the investment. Partnerships is really key. Understanding, right? Like vendors like Google, other cloud providers, we're looking to make this technology consumable. So from the standpoint of deal structures, there's always ways to work with partners like, ThoughtWorks, Mobius, to address how do we go about this with clear vision. So these efficiencies and processes that we're focusing upon are all optimized. So really taking, again, existing workflows with all the data that you have and being able to think about how do we turn our one-off solutions into consumable approaches and programs that we can just manage and evolve. So really understanding, the efficiencies that you're going to get, as well as the optimization that you'll be able to achieve, is really the questions that you have to ask yourself in terms of, is this worth it? And then from there, with government agencies, we're also seeing they typically have a huge vision when we do ask, right? Come up with their vision. We see the vision, and typically, okay, from a cost restriction standpoint, it might need to be a phased approach. So we start small, right? Going back to the proof of concepts, prove out something maybe for a small subset of users where the most manual tasks take place, where AI or agentic system could provide the most value. And then from there, iterate your development to get to the big picture, right? So sometimes implementing that phased approach, as well as articulating all the things that are, non-negotiable in a sense, allows us to make those better decisions and allows us to adapt and respond to maybe the vision changes once we get 2 to 3 years down the journey, right? So I think that's the beauty you have with government, and it can be addressed on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, both of you guys touched on 2 core concepts that we take very seriously at ThoughtWorks. One is, Richie, you were touching on, well, you both were kind of touching on the elements of just sound product thinking. So when we talk about product thinking, we talk about the 3 pillars, right? You want something that's desirable. you want something that's feasible, and you want something that's viable. And you need to have the right people in the room from a multidisciplinary team to address those three pillars appropriately in an integrated fashion. The second thing you need is what you were talking about, Dion, is that thin slice approach. That just goes back to ThoughtWorks and our agile roots is, monolithic systems, boil the ocean projects seldom are successful. Because the target moves by the time you implement, right? So not just people don't have the money to do those large scale things. So it takes a certain amount of skill set to break a North Star vision, the big picture vision that you referred to, Dion, down into those smaller steps, which is, what is that? How do you get that first MVP out, and then continuously design and continuously iterate on top of that to work yourself towards that North Star that's giving you the overall big picture that you wanted. Let's move on to one other question here. Okay, here's one. Beyond the technological aspects, what cultural shifts or organizational changes within government agencies are most critical for successfully integrating and scaling agentic AI solutions, and how can leaders foster these changes?
Man, Mike writes like a language model. That question that popped up there in StreamYard. Thanks for that.
Oh.
The question actually popped up over here. I think to go back to Dion's point about speed and vision and things changing. Every CEO is now a little bit of a startup CEO. And that's because things are just changing faster and faster and faster. And so those 5-year visions are going to become 3-year visions. Those 1-year transformations are going to become 6-month transformations. The shelf life is shorter. And so you have to have strong opinions that you hold weekly, if that makes sense, right? Because you really have to orient around the near term and the medium term so much more than the long term, because the pace of change and the scale of change is different. So from the mindset of where do I want to place bets, the whole construct of a long term and changing in phases, the priority and the definition changes a little bit. As it relates to the question around like agentic itself, I think there's 3 things that I would suggest. One is keep in mind that the technology is going to move. Like it has been moving for the last 7 years. Since the Transformer paper, the entire machine learning world has been moving. Yes, there was a lot of iceberg before we all started chatting with OpenAI's LLM. And so as you're thinking through constructs, remember that this is the worst the technology is ever going to be. This is like really important, because you have to try to skate where the puck is going. And here, the puck is moving really fast. Compute cost is going to drop, right? Latency is going to drop. The amount of data that we can leverage is going to rise. So you got to kind of plan knowing that this is the worst state the AI is ever going to be, from a cost, from a latency, from a capability standpoint. So as you start to pick agentic use cases, try not to pick the use cases that are only going to be satisfied by where it is right now, because there might be a really interesting use case that it just needs to get just a little bit better to get there, and it's going to get there in a year. So I think to the question that came in, that's one of the things that I think I'm not seeing a lot, which is, yes, we're doing all the stuff around picking use cases and de-risking, but we're not realizing that a year from now, the whole thing is going to change and it's all going there. So we got to cater for that. Dion, I love your thoughts on that, but that's the one thing that I see missing on the other side.
Yeah, I would say hitting on the point that you made, that the pace of the innovation, it's very much changing in real time. So from process centric to outcome centric thinking, I think is really the huge cultural shift within government that we're seeing right now. And it's a critical component for agentic AI because of the autonomy that can create, and understanding that, like, I know we talked about the effects on the labor workforce, understanding also there needs to be a human AI collaboration component, because sometimes I think there's always fear with new technology, especially from a government approach, as government is one of the largest consumers of technology. So being able to understand what the technology can do, what data privacy concerns the technology is addressing, all those components are key. So as we learn and we stay on top of the latest advancements, understanding that, in order to understand the technology and to trust it, we do have to experiment with it. So I think that is one of the biggest things, is really understanding the maturation and then adjusting accordingly to that in order to consume these technologies for your constituents.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful from both of you. And I think the thing that provokes for me is something we've been talking a lot about, um, even internally at ThoughtWorks, on how we use AI to do what we do. And one of the challenges, I think, organizationally and operationally, that we're challenging ourselves with is, when you have something that is a paradigm shift in technology that is as disruptive as agentic frameworks are to the old ways of doing business. The danger is you just apply technology to the same business process. So you keep if you got something you do that takes 10 steps, you just say, "Oh, I'm going to make each step better with AI," rather than rethinking, like saying, "Wow, AI enables me to eliminate 3 of these steps and actually transform this from a 10-step process to a 6-step process, and they're different steps," right? So having the being able to challenge yourself to step outside the traditional way of doing things. I dated myself with my younger team once. I used the old term, paving the cattle path. So I was told that not a lot of people use that saying anymore, but it is about just saying, hey, there's a better way of, when you have a new technology, give yourself the permission and the innovative foresight to say, hey, there's a different way. This fundamentally changes the way we think about how we do things and who does those things and the tools that they use to do them. And that to me, that's the most disruptive part about all of this. Is it's not just really cool technology that helps you do things better, faster, cheaper. It allows you to rethink your whole operating model for how you execute. With that, I think we are out of time. So I just want to wrap us up and thank our guests. Thank you, Richie and Dion, for your participation and your patience through all our technical difficulties today. What I want to just leave our audience with is thank you for joining us. And for those of you who stuck it out through some of our technical snafus, I really appreciate your patience and for sticking with us. If you're interested in exploring this topic further and find out what ThoughtWorks is doing around this seamless government experience with Mobius and Google, there's some links that the team will provide in addition to the event, where you can learn more and reach out if you have other questions you want to ask. So with that, it concludes our LinkedIn Live event, and I wish you all a great day.